Welcome to AlexGs Aquarium, everybody. Today I want to talk about water testing that I do in the 1600 gallon system. I kind of want to take all the water parameter tests that I do and rank them from what I think is the most important down to what I think is least important, even though they're all important, if that makes any sense. The first thing I want to talk about is the source water that I use for the 1600 gallon system. Now I run my water through our reverse osmosis, the ionizing filter, or RODI filter as they're called, to try and remove all the mineralization that's in the water from my city municipal source. And I do that because I want to make sure that I have the purest water that I can get possible, so that my salt mix that I'm using for the system adds all the mineralization that I want to the water and doesn't add anything extra. And I measure the purity of my RODI water by using these meters here. These are known as TDS meters, which measure your total dissolved solids in the water. Now the TDS meters work by measuring connectivity between a couple of little points on them, and it determines what the TDS of your water or total dissolved solids reading is in parts per million. And it's important to know that your source water is good. I usually am seeing a TDS of about 1 to 2 out of my RODI filter. Ideally you'd like to have 0, and I might try to shoot for that target a little bit more. It's pretty heavy mineralization in my water source, but it gets most of that stuff out and gives me a really good water source, which is the baseline of getting water into the 1600 gallon system and getting all the water parameters exactly where I want them. So this is by far one of the biggest things that I look at before I get into any of the water testing in the aquarium itself. The next most important parameters, which I think are the two most important for any kind of aquarium, whether it be fresh, salt, brackish, is your temperature and your pH levels. Depending on the type of animals that you want to keep in your aquarium, you're going to have to maintain the proper temperature and proper pH range in that tank. If you don't have that established first, it doesn't matter what the rest of your water parameters are, you're not going to have success. In the case of having a saltwater marine aquarium, your salinity or salt content is also equally important to your temperature and pH. Now for the 1600 gallon system, I use two different tools. I use a refractometer, which looks at the refraction index of the water, and I also use a hydrometer that floats in the water and measures the salt content that way. They're both good tools to have, and I highly recommend for whatever you're using to measure your salt, you keep a backup so that you can measure it in a couple of different ways. Now in the 1600 gallon system, I have electronic temperature probes, pH probes. You don't have to have that in your aquarium though, but since it was part of the Apex and I want to be able to monitor my system on a 24/7 basis, it's really nice to be able to have electronic temperature and pH probes available. And for the 1600 gallon system, the pH hovers in a range of about 7.9 to 8.0. It's mostly due to me being in a basement and just my water source that the pH is at that level. I haven't tried to raise it up any higher than that artificially, and I'm just letting everything sit where it is now. And I maintain the temperature of the 1600 gallon system between 77 and 78 degrees year round. That's the target temperature that I'm looking to achieve. And I use temperature controllers in my radiant heating system to maintain that temperature. Salinity, or the salt content of my water, I keep at 1.026 ideally. Sometimes it'll creep a little higher or a little lower than that. I'm usually testing my salt content about once a week, and the pH and the temperature, as I said, are monitored on a 24/7 basis. I still do use a manual test kit from time to time to make sure that the pH probe is accurate, but I haven't seen any drastic swings in my pH, which is usually telling me that it's still working out okay. But eventually I will have to recalibrate my pH probes, as they do require recalibration on a regular basis to ensure they're providing accurate readings. Now because the 1600 gallon system is supporting a coral reef environment, I have other water parameters which I think are by far the most important in a coral reef system, and that is your carbonate hardness or alkalinity, followed by your calcium and magnesium levels. All three of these are essential to the building blocks of corals. Anything that's going to be building a calcium carbonate skeleton, such as live corals, coralline algae, clams, and other invertebrates in your tank that all have calcium carbonate based exoskeletons, will all require these elements in order to be able to thrive and grow properly. Alkalinity I test every other day in the 1600 gallon system. The consumption rate on this is generally equal to that of the calcium. So if I'm testing my alkalinity, I generally know right where my calcium's at. I do test the calcium magnesium about once a week in the 1600 gallon system, but primarily I rely on my alkalinity test kit to tell me when it's time to dose. And when I dose, I'm dosing both calcium and alkalinity. Magnesium in my system has not really moved a whole lot, and I only test about once a week. In fact, I've never even dosed magnesium. And now with a calcium reactor online, it does have some magnesium media in it, which should hopefully just maintain the level that it's at. The final two tests that I do for the 1600 gallon system are my phosphates and nitrates. They're both equally important. The nitrates are the end of the nitrogen cycle, tend to be a little bit more difficult to get rid of. Phosphates have very few animals that utilize them, but both nitrates and phosphates will be utilized by macroalgae to grow, which is why I keep the refugium tanks. And it's important to understand the values here, because if you start to get a spike in nitrates and phosphates, there's a chance you're going to start to see some kind of algae bloom take place. Now, I'm on the tail end of an algae bloom, and in my case, I'm testing 0 for both of these. But I will be keeping an eye on them, testing them every week to 2 weeks to make sure that these levels stay stable and don't start to creep up. If they do, I will rely on a few different things, such as the macroalgae, to remove them. If I started to see a real serious issue with something like nitrates, I'd probably make a denitrating filter. And for phosphates, if it became a real severe problem, I'd probably use some kind of phosphate absorbing media. I want to try and avoid using those media so if I can, and run the system as naturally as possible. Now, I'm sure someone's asking why I have not talked about ammonia or nitrite testing. And for the 1600 gallon system, I will be perfectly honest, I never tested either one. I set this system up, it had very little amounts of life added to it over a long period of time, and the ammonia levels I know did a little bit of spiking in the beginning, but for the most part were never going to be something that needed to be tested on a regular basis. In a marine reef aquarium, if you have a good established tank and you're not suffering things like mass die-offs, everything's working just fine, I do not test ammonia or nitrite at all on a regular basis. It would be very rare. As a matter of fact, I don't even own a nitrite test kit at this point in time. But these are the tests that I do for the 1600 gallon system. Of course, if you have any comments or questions on the video today, or you have a different opinion on, or you think there's some other water tests that I should be doing or you like to do for your system, please go ahead, leave them down in the comments below. There's definitely a lot of debate and different methodologies on water testing. This is what I do for the 1600 gallon system though, and I've been doing it for years with saltwater, and I've gotten some great success with these water tests here. Of course, if you like today's video, please go ahead and give me that thumbs up. Let me know that you like the content. And if you want to see more on the journey of the 1600 gallon system, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Thanks again for watching, everybody, and I will see you on the next video.